politician among the Arabs, very wealthy. So, and then that happened 3 more times. And it was only on the 4th election that Ali was made the Caliph, the successor. He'd been biding his time in the meantime. When he eventually became the successor, the first 3 caliphs were all, like politicians. I mean, they weren't bad men, but they weren't geniuses. They weren't spiritual visionaries. I think Ali was, and Muhammad knew that, which is why he wanted him to be the successor. But they elected, a bit like the elections for the Tory party or something, or political party. They always go for the sort of the mediocre person that has the biggest vote. Whereas Ali was a genius, spiritual genius, who knew inside out what the Quran was about and what Islam was about. He knew what it was to surrender spiritually. Just one story illustrates that. I may have told this story before, it's worth saying. It sets Shiism in context. So, Ali was one of the greatest warriors in the Islamic army, which faced many battles, and there was one critical battle he was fighting away. He was very strong and brilliant fighter, and his opponent dropped his sword, and Ali could have just killed him, but instead Ali sheathed his sword and said to the opponent, "You better pick your sword up then," And the guy said to him, "Well, what are you talking about? Why? Surely you want to kill me? I mean, you've won, haven't you?" And Ali said, "Look, I'm only defending myself. We're not allowed to kill an unarmed person. It's against Islam. So and I don't want to kill you at all, full stop. To me, you're my brother in the eyes of God. You've just forgotten that. You think I'm your enemy. I'm not your enemy, actually. We're all children of God. But because you're not accepting that and you keep fighting me, I'm going to defend myself. And if I have to stop you, I may tragically have to kill you. But I'm not going to stain my soul by killing you when you're unarmed. Because to me, we are all children of God and we should be equal." Anyway, the guy was totally perplexed and said, "What is this? What are you talking about?" And anyway, he refused to pick his sword up and refused to go on fighting. And after the battle, he wanted to be explained more. What is this thing, Islam? And he eventually converted. He became a Muslim because he realized that was the truth, rather than fighting away. Now that shows you the quality of man that Ali was. He was a visionary, he was a poet, and strangely enough, when I was doing my chronological commentary on the Quran, I discovered that he himself had done a chronological sequencing of the entire Quran. I was looking for why has nobody done this before? And then I discovered Ali had done it, but his copy had gone missing. His beloved wife, Fatima, died in a tragic sequence of events with one of the other caliphs was coming to get Ali, and Fatima answered the door, and they broke the door down to get Ali, and it injured Fatima, who later died a few months later of her wounds. So that was another tragedy. And okay, so then Ali succeeded, but he didn't last long because the early caliphs had appointed a governor of Syria called Muawiyah, who was from the Umayyad dynasty, and he didn't accept Ali's election as caliph. He was very happy being ruler of Syria. They had lots of taxes. Islam had spread by now. It had extended to Egypt, Syria, places. And they weren't going to accept Ali because he was too nice. These were real politic kind of guys that wanted Islam as a business for militarism and taxing and extension of the faith through military force. Now, Ali knew that's not what true Islam is about. He was a much more spiritual kind of chap. But Muawiyah rebelled. There were a series of conflicts. And a long story short, eventually Ali went to a peace mediation and was betrayed, and he was killed. Against all agreements, against everyone broke their word, and he was a martyr for that. And that is a tragic moment in mankind's religious history, not just in Islam, because the world can only survive if we keep our word and if we honour our agreements and if we all strive together for peace. So Islam split into two factions or forces. There were the people that followed the caliphs and followed the letter and emphasised the written Quran and its interpretation according to the particular interpretation they wanted to put on it. That became known as the Sunni faith, which is box 80. The Shia faith were those people that remained faithful to Ali and his successors, because Ali had children, and so the Shias look back on Ali and his children and a succession of 10 imams or spiritual leaders that came from there. And the Shias say that they passed on verbally certain esoteric teachings, which originated with Muhammad and through Muhammad to Ali, and they were passed on to his son and to his successors. And the Shias believe that's the real meaning of Islam, and they can explain the verses in the Quran in detail. I mean, in my commentary on the Quran, I've used the Shia interpretations and the Sunni. I've tried to make my commentary universal to all Islamic avenues of interpretation, and the Shia faith itself split into variety. So you had people that followed the first 12 imams, that's called the Twelvers. Then you had Ismailis who branched off at a different point, and then you had the Sufis appearing. In the Sufi tradition, they all look on Ali as their fountainhead. So all Sufis say that Ali was the gate or the door to Gnosis, and the Druze as well. So Shiism is, and it became the dominant religion in about 1500 in Persia through various extraordinary events. And the Sufis and the Shias blended and gave us Persian mysticism, which is where the great poets like Hafiz and Rumi came from, and many of the greatest Islamic intellectuals actually were Persian inspired. Surawadi, one of them, also looked back to Zoroaster. So he would have agreed with what I was saying earlier about how Zoroaster from Sanliurfa had inspired Muhammad and so on. And the Shias hold that knowledge to this day inside Iran. More philosophy books are sold in Iran than in any other country in the world per head. I've had many Iranian friends, they love philosophy. I can't wait to get my periodic table translated into Persian and available in Persian universities. It should be. Why does the West not understand this? Why is it sort of so full of hatred and anger towards Iran? What happened, of course, in Khomeini's revolution is that they wanted to go back to their Shia tradition. Khomeini was trained as a Shia cleric, and they wanted to keep that alive. They wanted democracy, they wanted to become an Islamic republic. So taking the best of the models of Western thought, and Khomeini was a exile here in France, in Paris. He absorbed the teachings of the West, but didn't want to then destroy their own native traditions of Shiism. Is it possible to reconcile Shia thought with Islamic democracy and republicanism? I think it is, and there have been many great Shia intellectuals who've been trying to do that in the 20th century and still are. I think that Shiism is about peace ultimately, but it wouldn't just want diplomatic peace. You know, in the West we think peace is like something diplomats do or a peace treaty. No, it's much more, it's a collective thing we do socially. with each other and ourselves, and it's about our relationship to the absolute. If we can get rid of egotism, then peace might come, would be the Shia view, which is not that far from Shintoism, in fact. And I do have a book here in the library comparing Taoism and Sufism. It's by a Japanese philosopher, scholar, who's done a detailed study of Japanese thought and Chinese and Taoism. And then he compares that to Sufi thought, particularly Persian. And, you know, it's the same thing ultimately. It's about our need to surrender ego, which can take many forms. And if you think about the violence going on in the world now, I think Putin's egotism is what's caused the Ukraine tragedy. I mean, he's obviously a deluded individual who felt that by his aggression he would somehow, I don't know, destroy the West, destroy democracy. He has utter contempt for, the European Union, for France, for Britain, and so he's been conducting a kind of intellectual war against the West, including Brexit as one of its things, and then attacking America by promoting the advancement of the worst aspects of American culture, i.e. Trumpism. There's an implicit racism in white American circles, and what Putin and his KGB people did is very sneaky. They kind of egged that on. It's a form of jiu-jitsu. You use the attack, the worst aspects of your enemy for them to defeat themselves. And that happened with Brexit now, with Trump. But ultimately it goes back to Putin's egotism and their egotism. Look at Trump, the most egomaniacal person I've ever seen in politics, strutting around the stage, as with the Brexit people. So we've seen this massive outbreak of egotism, which is the opposite of Islam. It's the opposite of Shiism. And so yes, and likewise in Netanyahu's Israel, the tragedy of October the 7th didn't have to be responded to in the way he did, but his ego insisted that it would lead to the mass attack on Gaza and the ruthless extermination of thousands of people. 28,000 people have been killed by his bombing attacks, using a AI robot to bomb them. This is egotism gone mad, and it's Netanyahu who's responsible, and he's got a cabinet around him of absolute egotists. Again, utterly the opposite of everything about spiritual surrender, which is tragic because the greatest Jewish thinkers and the greatest Islamic and Christian thinkers have been working for centuries on reconciling our differences. You know, doing interfaith work. I've met some of the world's leading interfaith scholars and from Jewish, Islamic and Christian backgrounds, and pagan and Shinto. We've been working away tirelessly behind the scenes to end these wars. But the Putins and the Netanyahus and the Trumps, have not been listening. So that's my response. It's interesting. Japan now is trying to heal, trying to be a peace mediator in the Middle East, they are upset at Gaza as much as anyone else. So let's just pray that the wisdom people of all these traditions can come forward and play a leading role, and not allow this orgy of self-destruction to carry on. Okay, I think it's time. We can only turn to the gods, I think, at this point, because the human wisdom can only do so much. Let's look at the tarot of the gods and see what insight they can cast. So I'll let you shuffle them up and select one. So the tarot were developed here in France in the 18th century from ancient medieval roots. Okay, we have the Queen of Air, Eon. Right, that's a brilliant card. Okay, let's pass them over and have a new shuffle up. Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, well, this is very interesting. So, the second one we have is Panku, number 16, which is the Chinese deity, but also kind of Taoist as well, and Shintoist. Let's look at Eon first, the Queen of Air. Carl Jung wrote a book called Eon, which went into this deity. Eon was a late Hellenic deity among connoisseurs of religion. By then, there was a very profound kind of esoteric current running through Hellenistic thought, partly drawn from Mithras and the Mithraic tradition, which was a Persian deity of light, Mithras. One thing that religions always want to know about is what's the meaning of time as a whole, and where are we now? What time is it cosmically? You know, so all the religions have a kind of what's called an eschatology, which is they want to know where the future's coming. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? You know. Eon was the god of the cycles of ages and time, as well as the cycles of the year. So he's surrounded by a zodiac, which represents the year. And he has the snake coiled around him as a deity, and he holds a timepiece. And he is the lord of all time. He's, if you want, the god of cosmic time. He was associated with the mystery religions, like the mysteries of Cybele, and the Dionysian mysteries, and the Orphic mysteries, in fact, as well as the Mithraic. And Jung argues that he's a very important archetypal figure who lurks away within Christian iconography in the form of the Mithraic mysteries. So he represents a whole cosmos. I think what's going on in the world at the moment is about these wars we're seeing, the outer wars of Ukraine versus Russia, or Russia versus Ukraine in the West, and Israel versus the Palestinians, who are both Christian and Muslim. They're clashes about who controls time, who controls the narrative. The wars are going on in the information sphere because it's about who controls history and tells the story. So the Israelis have a totally different view of history than the Palestinians, who have their own story, the Nakba, the suffering, the persecution by Israel. And then the Israelis have a totally different story of the Holocaust. They're being persecuted over the centuries in Europe. They weren't persecuted in the Middle East. They weren't persecuted by Muslims. Muslims gave the Jews favoured people status. This is one of the twists of the narrative, that somehow got distorted because it was the Ottoman Empire that gave the Jews a home when they were kicked out by Catholic Spain and Portugal. And this idea that Muslims and Jews are eternal loggerheads is completely false. It's a modern invention. Actually, Muslims and Jews were best friends for centuries, and their intellectuals were collaborating and so on. Where does Eon sit? Eon presides in the House of Eon, which archaeologists have found in Cyprus, over a beauty contest in a mosaic, which is a sort of very Hellenistic way of putting all this. Really what's going on here is these different races and religions are having a beauty contest. Who is the most beautiful? Who is the wisest? Who's the loveliest? And Eon is going to decide. Because as the Lord of Time, he hands the torch to each era and each culture. I'm pretty sure that Eon, who's the Queen of Air in the tarot of the gods, he would want everyone to win. What's the fuss? Let everyone win. Why can't the Shintoists win? Why can't the Shias win? And the Sunnis? Why can't the Jews win? And all the different varieties of Jews? Why can't the Christians win? Surely this world is big enough for everyone to have what's called a win-win. In conflict resolution jargon, we always say conflict should be ended with a win-win solution. So we all win. And in the runes, win is the rune of joy. And it's the letter W. We'll come to the runes shortly. So win-win is we all get joy. And I've been working along with other colleagues philosophically at trying to recalibrate these traditions so that they fit into each other as complementary instead of conflictual. If only we could study each other's systems of thought more, as I'm trying to do here, we'd realise it can be a win-win. You know, you can stay a Jewish, whatever, Orthodox or Kabbalist or Samaritan and still honour and love your Palestinian Christian brothers and sisters. There's nothing, and surely that's the win-win that we're looking for here. So yes, so Eon is a fantastic card and a god. And if you want to know more, read Carl Jung's book, Eon, where he talks about this archetype and shows, what the real meaning of this is. He calls it, Eon, Researchers into the Phenomenology of the Self. A great title. Hegel wrote The Phenomenology of Spirit, which was a classic work. And old Jung comes along and does the sequel, which he calls Eon, Researchers into the Phenomenology of the Self. And that's something that, if only we paid more attention to ourselves, in the Delphic sense, know thyself, if we all did that, I believe these wars and conflicts we'd realise they're just nightmares we've been having. It's time to wake up to enlightenment, which is our natural state of being. We're all Eon on one level, and we're all the Lord of Time. And then there was Panku. He came along. He wanted to be part of the party. And Panku is, he's the creator, actually, in the Chinese religion. And in the, he stands for the tower here the card shows Panku with his Tower of Destruction being knocked over. Now, this is slightly tongue-in-cheek if you read the Tarot of the Gods, because there's some strange facts around the Twin Towers. This is one of the Twin Towers being knocked down in New York on 9/11. I've written the first history of the 9/11 events. Nobody's done this before, but it obviously triggered a whole sequel of tragedies in the Middle East, attacks on Iraq, great sufferings. As far as I can tell, and as a historian, there's never been any definitive proof that the 19 people responsible for the Twin Towers destruction were the only people involved. All the evidence points to a fact there was a group behind the scenes operating those 19 and helping to manufacture the event as a overwhelming narrative that the media ran with, immediately blaming, oh, that's all, Osama bin Laden. And then suddenly the narrative shifted to, well, it was Saddam Hussein as well. And that seemed to justify, in 2003, a massive invasion of Iraq. Well, this is how history gets hijacked in front of our eyes. It's like a theft of our reality, because Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. That's an absolute certainty. People that tried to say that got silenced and put in prison. And I would say it's 100% certain that the 19 people accused of being involved in the 9/11 incidents were not the sole people involved, and some of them may not have even been involved. The thing was manufactured. Who by and for what purpose? That's the mystery. And there are many hypotheses in my book on the history of 9/11. I've gone as a scientific historian who looks at evidence. I've said this is the evidence we need and don't have yet. These are the possible hypotheses as to who was involved in 9/11. We don't know yet which one. I suspend judgment. I'm an academic. I don't prematurely come to conclusion. But somebody or someone was a criminal mind or a group of minds involved in that event, using it to then trigger a whole load of largely anti-Islamic actions. So we can say that whoever was involved in 9/11 was doing it from a place of horrendous ego, wishing to destroy, Islam. So yes, read the book on 9/11. And what's the link to Panku? Well, there's a very strange fact which I discovered in a study of the history of Mossad, actually, which is the Israeli Secret Service. They were monitoring Osama bin Laden, the supposed mastermind of 9/11. And they discovered that he visited China a couple of times before 9/11 happened, on behalf of the Taliban regime running Afghanistan. It's possible, I speculate in my book, that when Osama bin Laden was visiting China, he was getting huge amounts of weapons for the Afghan regime. He might have said something to his Chinese hosts, we're thinking of doing an attack on New York, we're going to bring down the Twin Towers. Probably won't be able to bring them down, but at least we're going to make a big, an explosion. And the Chinese might have said, and it might not have been the president, it might have been some faction in the intelligence services, said, well, that's interesting. Why don't we help you with that? Why don't we help you wire the building, or we'll pay for somebody to do it, or whatever. I'd love to, some of the evidence I want to see is I want to see the secret Chinese recordings of bin Laden's visit to Beijing to know whether that conversation happened. If China said to bin Laden, yeah, we're going to help you, bring down the Twin Towers because it's going to attack capitalist running dogs at the heart of their empire and America. What if when it happened, what if Bush and Blair and co discovered this? What if they realised China had pre-knowledge of the attack and had done nothing but actually helped it? What if they realised this has got China? My speculation is they wouldn't have said anything because they didn't want a World War III with China. And therefore they decided to hush it up and say, nothing. Because there's nothing on the internet anywhere about this hypothesis I'm sharing with you. So far as I know, I'm the only intellectual, apart from one or two scattered around, and I'm just a historian. So, if it's true, the irony behind this card is that the Chinese creator god is saying to the West, okay, you build your big towers, it's time to knock them down, show you a bit of, teach you a bit of humility. Because the creator god can also be the destroyer, as the Hindu system knows. Brahma is the creator, but another side is also Shiva. So I suspend judgment, maybe, and the card is a sort of ironic comment on the Twin Towers, because we're living in the aftermath of the Tower of Destruction. I don't know whether Chinese had foreknowledge, but I do know that when the West forces finally captured Tora Bora, which was the caves bin Laden had been hiding in, they found it full of Chinese weapons. So the weapons deal that bin Laden did went through. The Taliban had vast resources from China. But this is all hushed up. This is like history behind history. And obviously I hope it's not true. But then I wish to God 9/11 had never happened. I wish nobody had ever planned that tragedy. And there are other hypotheses. Other groups might have been involved. It's the whole thing is just a nightmare. My view is that truth is more valuable than covering this stuff up. I'm a doctor that would say if a patient's got cancer I would actually tell them, because I think you can then get them to help self-healing rather than keeping it quiet. So if China had foreknowledge of 9/11 and even helped it, then I think we need to know that. And if not, then we need to know that too. Truth sets us free, as the Christian text says, which is in the mothership of the Anglican Church and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. I love New York, that's why I wrote the book about 9/11. I want to know who was behind it. And anyway, it was definitely Pan Ku who was behind it, because the creator decided on that day to become a destroyer. I think the lesson for the West to learn was to be more humble. Tragically, we took the opposite learning and we used it to increase our arrogant imperialism and went and invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. And for 20 years we were in Afghanistan, spending trillions of dollars for no purpose whatsoever. We should have been funding peace around the world, which is why I'm involved with a project to try and create a US Department of Peace with help from people around in the States. There's a bill before Congress to create a Department of Peace, which I think should be on the top of the Pentagon. I call it the Nonagon. And the Pentagon was also hit on 9/11 as well, symbolically. But, the evidence seems to show, like, where was the plane? If it was really this great plane coming out of the sky, where was the plane? So there are many mysteries behind history, and this is what the card points to. So we have the answer to our current problems, which is we're all Eon, let everybody win, let's have a happy ending to history where we all honour each other's deification process, which is ongoing. But then we have, we have the disruption element. We have the Twin Towers coming down. We have the October the 7th event. We have the tragic attack on Gaza. Why do we keep doing it to ourselves? That's a good question. Marnie said it's because the devil is stealing history. The evil forces have hijacked history, and the forces of light are not strong enough to counter that. And that's what the Cathars said as well. I think the forces of light are strong enough, but we have to seriously put our cards on the table and share truth with each other. We have to come from a place of purity and love and wisdom. We have to follow the Eightfold Path of Buddha, the non-violence of Mahavira and all the other great sages, and the non-violence of Christ. And through that we can undo these tragedies, these Twin Towers falling down. Then we can find the truth. And that will set us free. So that's why I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, is to find out under the rubble of history, who made these towers come down? What on earth's going on here? And can we rebuild them? I would like to see the whole of Palestine rebuilt. That's the latest Twin Towers collapse that we're watching in real time. As if that's going to help Israel. I mean, how is mass slaughtering 30,000 people going to help Israel sleep at night? It's kind of continuation of the distortion of the narrative. The only way we can get peace is through peaceful means, as Gandhi said. And so I think that's the lesson here. Let's learn humility, really, which is, as T.S. Eliot said in the Four Quartets, it's endless. Right, now we'll finish